Welcome back to Farms and Frontlines, everybody. It's been quite some time. We had a nice siesta. Well, I did. Jess, I know you've been busy working.
Yeah.
I'll pretend I've been equally as busy with state government work. Um, but we're back and we're pretty excited. Jess, you recommended a while ago that I should watch a documentary called Common Ground,
Yep.
and I did, and it was really good. And it talked a lot about just farming practices and regenerative farming, which, if you're not familiar with, we're going to talk about today.
Lucky
So
you. We're going to
super
teach you.
exciting. I know. Like, wow, who knew you would learn something from this podcast? Whether it's correct, we're going to do our best to be correct on what we're teaching you. But
We are also learning, yes.
yes, but before we begin, Jess, I found something that I thought you would enjoy. I went to a party, well, not a party, just a dinner the other day, and I made guacamole.
Oh,
And the whole time I could just think, I'm supporting drug cartels, but it was very tasty despite that. And when I went to the dinner, the people are their former, like they lived in the apartment above us, and they were kind of nice enough to listen to our episodes. And they were like, "Oh, good, I'm glad you bought some avocados because I felt bad every time I bought one after listening to your episode." I was like, "Don't feel bad. It's just
yeah.
education and knowledge about what's actually happening."
Yeah. You're
But
still supporting those farmers, but also
exactly.
drug cartels.
And that's what she said. She was like, "Well, I'm still supporting the farmers, right?" I'm like, "Yes.
Yeah.
Regardless, somebody's going to be buying it. It's okay."
What is that relationship called? Like with like that
Symbiotic.
yeah, symbiotic, yeah.
Hmm.
Like the feeder off of like the massive animal, yeah.
Right, yeah,
It's,
exactly.
it is an
The
unfortunate
cartels are
symbiotic.
the parasite.
Yes.
But I found the first written recipe for guacamole from the 16th century. Is
Oh, really?
from a pirate named William Dampier. In
Hmm.
1697, he wrote about it in a book called A New Voyage Round the World.
Oh,
And so
neat.
I'm just going to read this out really quick. From his little book, it says, "The avocado pear tree is as big as most pear trees, and the fruit as big as a large lemon. It is of a green color till it is ripe, and then it is a little yellowish. The substance in the inside is green, or a little yellowish, and as soft as butter. Within the substance there is a stone as big as a horse plum. This fruit hath no taste of itself, and therefore 'tis usually mixed with sugar and lime juice and beaten together in a plate, and this is an excellent dish. The ordinary way to eat it is with a little salt and roasted plantain, and thus a man that's hungry may make a good meal of it."
Hey, there you go.
Yeah. And I read this and I said, this sounds like if Nick was describing
Yeah, exactly.
guacamole. But yeah, so that was from A New Voyage Round the World by William Dampier in 1697.
Interesting.
Yeah, describing essentially guacamole, but like with sugar and
With
whatnot. It
sugar in
sounds
it.
pretty terrible, but I saw on like Reddit somebody just recently like made that recipe and
And
was like, it's more like dessert than a meal. I wouldn't recommend eating
like
it like
like
this.
pudding. Like
Yeah,
ew.
yeah.
Blech.
So I think mine was better, but that's the first written recipe. So I thought that was pretty
That's
cool.
crazy. That's neat.
Yeah. But anyway, back on track. We're talking about regenerative farming today.
Oh, too bad.
I know, right? We're just gonna go on and discuss pirate recipes for the next half hour.
Oh, can I tell you a pirate thing that I learned
I
not that
mean, we're
long
on a roll
ago?
now, yeah.
We took the cadet candidates from the prep school to Ellis Island and the
Neat.
Statue of Liberty, and then they got to roam around New York City. They went to the 9/11 museum too.
Cool.
Ellis Island used to be called Gibbet Island because the gibbet was a name for the thing that you hanged people from, and they used to hang pirates on Ellis Island.
Oh, hmm.
Yeah, used to
Wow.
be the place where you're like, caught you pirate, now you go get hanged.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So that was
And
like,
then later we're like, welcome, immigrants.
yeah, yeah. That had a vast, what a glow up, man.
Woo! A little 180 there.
Was this like when it was still New Amsterdam or when it was New York? Do you
It
know?
was early 1800s.
Hmm.
That can't be right. I don't know. I don't know.
1996, actually. Yeah.
Weirdly enough, 2002.
Yeah. All right.
No, before it was 1700. So Samuel Ellis was the one that owned the island, and he let the government hang pirates and the other criminals there.
Can you imagine just being like, yeah, sure, hang them outside my house. That's fine.
Well, yeah, because people thought that was like a form of entertainment. You
Well,
go into
yeah,
the
true.
hanging later, might as well. I'll bring the
What else are we
guacamole.
gonna do? Yeah. Wow. wild.
But it was 1700s, but early 1800s, something else happens there, and I forget what. And then later
Hmm.
it becomes the immigrant center for
That's
the
cool.
United States.
I
Yeah,
never knew that. I went to Ellis Island a long time ago, like when I was in like eighth grade or something. But it was,
yeah.
I really enjoyed it. Like I thought it was really cool. Um,
Man, somehow I gotta look it up now. Something happens in there. Maybe there's fire or something. I don't know.
yeah,
Pirates
I
and
think you
then
might be correct.
immigrants.
I think there was a fire,
Yeah,
but I don't know.
I
I
don't
feel like
know.
anywhere where there's like written records, there's always a fire.
Of course.
You know, Nice.
We or there's like that's when Sally was on duty and she wasn't paying attention. Just say there was a fire so we don't say
Exactly. Yeah.
because there's a huge gap in our records.
Well, I remember that was such a big deal with like VA records and veteran records. Like it used to be when I worked for Congress, I dealt a lot with Agent Orange claims,
Oh,
and a
hmm.
lot of the stuff for the VA for like Vietnam veterans was just handwritten files and stuff
Oh,
that was stored in the archive in St. Louis, and there was a fire.
oh gosh.
Yeah, well, that or Sally was on duty again,
I
but
know.
so like they just like, oh, we don't have that. Like that was lost. I was like, well, that sounds like a you problem,
Yeah, I know,
you
right?
know, like not the veterans problem.
Yeah, they didn't set their shit on fire.
As far as we know,
Yeah, that's right.
they were not the cause of the St. Louis fire.
Mm,
Hmm. Yeah, and you can't prove anything. No.
that's true.
Um, but all right, there's a little history about Ellis Island and guacamole. So completely changing track now.
Let's see how you make this transition.
Yeah, right. Regenerative farming. I guess Jason Momoa kind of looks like he could play a pirate, and he was one of the
Oh, Aquaman
yeah, he's Aquaman. There you go. Look at that. We are
probably deals with islands.
smooth. Islands and pirates, right? He cares about the ocean. And he was one of the what do you call it? Narrators
Narrators
for Common Ground.
for Common Ground, this film that we're
Hmm.
going to talk about. Yeah.
It was actually really cool. I wasn't expecting Childish Gambino,
Yeah.
Jason Momoa. Like, oh, okay, neat. There were a few
The
others
guy
in
from
there.
Vampire Diaries,
Yeah, I didn't watch
Ian
that, but
something.
right. I was wondering who that was. I don't know who this is, but
Ian something. Summer, I don't know it.
Summer thing.
Samsonite. That's way off.
Ian Samsung of Vampire Diaries.
Well, and I have to say, this is the second in a series. The first one is called Kiss the Ground,
Right, and I did not watch that one.
and we didn't watch that one.
That was a book,
But
right? As well.
yes,
Okay. We'll
written
put
by
in
somebody.
if you sign up for the newsletter, we'll put links to all of this, the book and the documentaries,
Yeah,
in the newsletter for you to watch if you're so inclined. It was like less than 2 hours, probably like an hour and 45 minutes, but it was a really good
yeah,
watch. I assume the first one is just as good, but haven't
yeah,
watched it yet. But we're talking about Common Ground, talking about regenerative farming, which is a really interesting idea.
yeah. So yeah, right. And the documentary I just thought had a nice like viewpoint on looking at this subject, right? It's like we're not saying we're not pro or con like some kind of political party.
Right.
We are just like pro earth.
Yeah, and they had a lot
Pro
of they
environment.
had
Yeah.
they had a lot of like Republican farmers on there because a lot of
Mhm.
it's in the mid took place in the Midwest that they showed us, and there were even some Republican members of Congress who were like,
Mhm.
I am a Republican and I care about my farmers, so like
Yeah.
I want to do what's best and let you all be successful, and so we're not this is not like it shouldn't be
Hmm.
a either or side of the aisle kind of issue
Yeah.
here. It's just
Yeah.
focusing on best and new farming practices. Well, when I say new,
And not even, yeah.
it's just, not widely utilized right now.
I love that part of the documentary. So the documentary kind of goes into, okay, so regenerative farming. So what is it?
Mhm.
Where do these practices originate from? And, what are the benefits that you're going to get out of that versus if you don't? And then what is the government doing? How is the government supporting or hindering regenerative farming? And then what are other factors that are kind of playing into this? And they go into chemical companies,
Mhm.
pesticides.
Yeah.
Why are they involved? How involved are they? How deeply entrenched are they in this process to deal with the government?
Unsurprisingly, Monsanto comes up a bunch, which
Hmm.
anybody who has I mean, even if you
Yep.
haven't been paying attention to like farming practices and agriculture, you probably are familiar with the name Monsanto. Like I
Yep.
remember hearing about them and all the crazy stuff they were doing before I had any interest in agriculture.
Yeah. Huge, huge companies, lots of money
Hmm.
involved. Yep.
And like unsurprisingly, a lot of the chemicals that are used on farms, we, may not have known about it decades ago or even a
Hmm.
decade ago, but now it's come out that a lot of them do, like prolonged exposure does cause different types of cancer, which obviously nobody wants. We don't want to be
Right.
exposing our farmers to cancer. But we'll get more into that because there's the whole thing about like Bayer buying the chemical
Hmm.
companies and then also producing the cure for
The
cancer.
cure for the
Yeah,
cancer.
like
Yep.
it's
Hmm.
wild.
It's
But I
terrible.
think like when the documentary opened, you see that one farmer in
Hmm.
South Dakota or North Dakota, one of the Dakotas,
One of the Dakotas.
and he's going through his land, his farm, and it's all green and looks like a great farm, right?
Hmm.
And it tells you he's been using regenerative farming for a few years now. Then he's like driving and he's like, we're going over to my neighbor's land. And when you get over there, he steps out of his little cart, tractor, whatever have you, and it's the whole thing is just dust. It's
Yeah.
just
Barren.
completely just
Yep.
barren. And I think that was really cool, like eye opener for me was like when you hear of the Dust Bowl
Yeah.
and like that historical event where the farm just completely dried out and the soil was turned to dust,
Hmm.
and the wind blew it up and you couldn't grow anything. And it's just because of the farming practices. It
Yeah.
wasn't because like any natural event that occurred that made the soil dry out. It was the farmers were planting things without knowing it,
Yeah.
and then taking all the nutrients from the soil and it just left the soil barren and desolate. And the Dust Bowl happened.
Yeah.
And like that is happening on these farms. So it's like these mini localized dust bowls, which is kind of wild to think about because like how long has farming been a thing, right? Like it's
Yeah.
been it's wild that it's 2025 and it's not widely accepted that like change is needed to prevent this kind of stuff.
Right. And the Dust Bowl is what, 100 years ago now?
Hmm.
Like 1920s, 1930s?
All I know is Steinbeck wrote about it, so it's pretty old.
Well, there you go.
That guy.
Okay, there we go. But let's talk some words that we're saying and define them. So, right, the whole thing is really regenerative farming. And
Hmm.
as you and I talked afterwards, like there are some things that we just take as like this is how you farm. So
Right.
regenerative farming is thinking about the soil health
Hmm.
and how that little like mini ecosystem under the dirt is super important for the dirt health, which
Yeah,
makes it
that's
not dust.
long-term soil health. Yeah.
Yeah, water retention, so you don't have these crazy mudslides and runoffs, and adding nutrients back into our food because studies have shown that even if you're eating your vegetables, the nutrient density of those vegetables has gone down over the last couple decades.
Right.
So it all comes out of the soil. So how do you keep the soil healthy? And it talks about these, it's again labeled regenerative farming. So instead of ripping the weeds out and spraying like weed killer,
Mhm.
you use things like cover crops. Sometimes you hear like partner crops, like
Yeah.
tomatoes and marigolds or whatever, right? Like
Right. Right.
things
Right.
that you grow together that help each other out and keep the pests out and the weeds. So cover crops, and then also no-till farming. So
Which.
when you think about
Mhm.
these like giant like rotating saw blades in the dirt, those things, if you've ever watched Final Destination, the things that are going to take you out at the end of the movie,
Yeah, that
like
like completely churn up the soil,
yeah.
and which again, this was the thing you and I were saying, like that's just a part of farming, right? Like you
And
just
that's what I
have
would
to
think, right? You got to
churn
dig
it
in the
up
dirt, stick
and
the seeds in. Yeah.
yeah, but underneath the soil, which is like I do not expect like just average Joe farmer to know like that there's this intricate network of essential veins growing
Yeah.
underneath the soil that keeps it healthy, that keeps dragging the water from the soil up into the plants and the nutrients up into the food that we'll be growing. And when you
And I,
sever those by tilling
yeah.
it, you're creating less nutrient dense produce and leaving the soil less healthy so it doesn't have that chance to stay healthy.
Yeah. And I don't want to make any assumptions on who knows what, but I do think it's interesting just to learn on our end.
Hmm.
Um, the little like how intricate just soil, right? And the health of the soil is. Like you were saying, like ripping up the roots, also like all the fungi that grow underneath. And I knew some of the types of fungi that they were talking about because I have probably an unhealthy plant collection in my house. And to help grow, some of these fungus are recommended to stick in your
Mm,
soil because it's an artificial environment that I'm creating.
right, right, right.
But yeah, again, these little fungi communities underneath the soil just help oxygenate it and bring all this nutrients in, and like you were saying, hold on to the water. So when you're tilling it, right, you're upsetting that ecosystem, you're disrupting it, so then it can't do its job like it's supposed to. Those little
Right.
neurons can't connect and like do the things they need to do. But if you had asked me, I would think that's just how you do it. Like you got to
Yeah,
rip
that's what
that
I'm
soil
saying.
up so you can stick the crops in.
Like
Turns out it's not.
if somebody gifted me a farm and was like, go ahead, start farming, I would just go to like local farmers or like a tractor supply or something,
Yeah,
like, okay, what do I do? And then I just do what they told me, what's
yeah.
like common knowledge. So I wouldn't
And
have
it would
any
be the
idea to
things
be
that we just
like,
said, right?
yeah,
I'd rip the weeds out. I'd
exactly.
till up the soil, put seeds in or plants, and then go from there.
Yeah, and then I'd be
And
like, why
then,
is my farm a
yeah,
dust bowl right now? Like, what
yeah.
happened?
And then the other part, right, of regenerative practices is, rotational grazing. So the other
Hmm.
part that was brought into the documentary was like the role of animals and how they are connected in this, not like a separate, we hear a lot about cattle and grazing and the CO2 effect of having cattle farms. But
Hmm.
the documentary goes into actually, if you incorporate them correctly, they are super important to these like little farm ecosystems, which I
Yeah, I
thought was awesome.
remember the farmer was talking about like it was it was kind of gross because he was just manhandling cow
Yeah,
patties.
he literally just picked up a pile
Just
of poop.
yeah,
Yeah. It
just
was,
with
yeah.
his like, hey, whatever,
He's like,
to
let's
each their
check it
own.
out. Like,
But when he did, there was like a whole ecosystem growing underneath that. There was bugs, there was different sorts of weeds, and like the soil was healthy.
yeah.
And this was like, not that long after creation of said patty. So letting it sit there, letting the soil absorb all
Hmm.
the nutrients and whatnot. These are things that on like, a typical like a CAFO, like the massive cattle factory farms, where it would just that kind of stuff would just either evaporate into the air because there's no healthy soil,
Yeah.
or slide into the closest river or whatever and
Yeah.
pollute that. But when working in tandem with these like actual farmland,
Hmm.
or like we saw in the Mexican and the Chihuahuan desert, they have like the cattle come in and graze on like whatever is there.
Yeah.
And over the course of like a year, the desert transformed itself. Like there
Yeah.
was
Right.
new life, like new growth. Like you would never know that it was completely barren. But just by
And
having cattle come in and graze and do their business, and then they move them on to the next plot of land, and they come back a year later.
yeah.
It's not
And
like
so,
they're
yeah, that's right.
overusing or
That rotation is going on. Yeah, exactly.
it was just super cool to see how the animals were involved. But that brings us to like one of the other things I thought was really cool, but they used, I don't want to say ancient, but very old Native American farming practices where I think one of the things the one narrator said was like people used to think that the Native Americans followed the buffalo, but the
Right.
buffalo followed them due to
Right.
their farming practices and knew how to treat the land. And like they even did controlled burns, which is
Yep.
which is I had no idea.
Yep.
That's so cool. Like,
Yeah. And, in areas that don't do control burns, like California is one of the case studies, there are indigenous groups that lobbied to be like, this, we know this works. We have
mhm,
hundreds of years
yeah,
of
doing
evidence to
this.
show that this
Yeah.
works. Let's do this.
Hmm. And I get
And
it. Like you're afraid of setting dry land on fire. Makes
well,
sense. But
and I'm only speaking in terms of California. I don't know. I can't, I'd have to look up anywhere else, but like
right.
California was like the CO2 aspect of it. Is it worth intentionally setting a fire and have that CO2 happen versus like maybe we'll have a fire and then, but we've seen like even us in our lifetime, the devastation, like the humongous fires that are
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I'm just going off of like what I'm reading, right? I'm not like I'm not Smokey
No,
the
yeah.
Bear. I don't know how.
All we can say for sure is don't do fireworks for your gender reveal parties, please.
Don't.
And especially in areas where the fire danger is high today.
Only you can avoid forest fires.
Yeah. Thanks, Smokey. Maybe you are Smokey.
That You know how like people want to grow up and be astronauts and like
Hmm.
really like ambitious jobs? That was the job I wanted to do when I grew up, was change the Smokey the Bear sign to be like your fire danger today is high. That's what I wanted to do.
Oh man. Can you imagine that? Like, yeah, six figures. I get paid pretty well.
Yeah. I'm like, hell yeah. I gotta change the sign one time a day. Done. Sign me up.
Oh man.
Oh well. Anyway,
Now you just work at West Point.
I know.
Oh man.
Um, but this is like the bigger ideas throughout this documentary. Like they show examples of this work, how to incorporate these ideas into the farming practices, big and small, because they do
Hmm.
talk to some small farmers,
Yeah.
and they even talk about like front yard farms, like and how that
Yeah.
can be talked into that. So right, like acres and acres, and then like your front yard. So they
Hmm.
talk all types of it and how to incorporate these processes
Processes. Yeah. Process sizing.
and that it's, doable. It's not like some crazy, like, you got to invest six figures to get this to happen. They're like very doable, small action
Right.
things. And it can, in terms of doing that, right? It's in having cover crops, you don't need to use pesticides. In
Right.
having like a rotation of really like any grazing animal, you can incorporate some of these like practices into bringing life back into areas that don't have it. And
Right.
it's just smart, like these things are it was just eye-opening. It was just if governments are looking at this and thinking about it, like we could really not we, but they could like, really transformative actions could happen based off of
Yeah.
these small changes.
Yeah, the royal we. But
Yeah, yeah.
I agree. I mean, like that was one of the things from the documentary that kind of I keep saying it's one of the things that opened my eyes, but there's a lot of stuff in here that's like, oh wow, I didn't realize.
Yeah.
But I thought it was really interesting when they would follow farmers who had typically used like pesticides and like Roundup and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and had been exposed to this all of this kind of
Hmm.
stuff for a very long time, and they had just done the traditional knowledge and gone through it and done it like you were supposed to do it, right?
Yeah.
And they use subsidies like crop insurance and stuff like that, and
Hmm.
then the one guy was like, I've been doing this regenerative farming stuff for like the past 3 years. My farms are more healthy than they've ever been. I haven't bought crop insurance in 3 years, and like his farm is super healthy. He's saving money, and it's not like he doesn't have a dust bowl. He's not exposed to these chemicals anymore,
Yeah.
and it's just like it's just an easier way. And like I mean, again, I'm not a farmer. I don't know what other people would say. Like this documentary obviously focused on the positives and why people are doing it.
Hmm.
They really didn't go and talk to anybody who's like, yeah, I know what regenerative farming is, but I choose to keep doing it this
That's
way.
true. That's true.
So
There wasn't, yeah, that's true.
that would be something I'd be interested to hear. But one of the other things that I thought was really interesting that kind of went with like the Native American land,
Practices and
yeah, the land practices
hmm
was the black farmer's legacy in
hmm
regenerative practices. When they first brought up George Washington Carver,
hmm
I kind of had to just like hang my head for a minute because I'm like, man, our education did not do this man justice. Like when I hear George Washington Carver, I'm like, oh yeah, peanut,
Peanuts. Yeah.
yeah, like,
Hmm.
cool. Yeah, he was big on peanuts, which he was, but
Yeah.
there
For a
was
reason.
so much more than that, right?
Hmm.
Like he in the 1890s he was promoting crop rotation
Hmm.
and the use of legumes like peanuts to rejuvenate depleted soil and to get those nutrients back into the soil so that they could next
Right.
rotation, next season or whatever, have healthy soil to grow whatever their typical crop was, right?
Yep. Yeah, because peanuts were like sticking nitrogen back in the soil, which is what it was
Yeah.
needing. Yeah.
Yeah, which
Hmm.
like I never would have known that. And science in the 1890s, I can't even imagine like the leaps and bounds we've made to today where it should be just like obvious, right?
Well, yeah, but even then, like just thinking about what George Washington Carver finds and how he's thinking about the land and who's using the land and who has it, and then how do you improve it? It's just like blows my mind that he's able to like do hundreds of studies and finds all these things, right? He's got a ton of patents. Wait, does he have patents? Am I talking about the wrong guy?
I think he does, but I don't know.
He does, right? He's got a ton of patents out.
We can go back and
Either
look. I
way,
don't know.
it's just incredible that in the late 1800s he's able to find all this stuff out. Like you said, we just don't do this man justice.
So he has three patents out.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're kind of wild. I never would have guessed what his
yeah.
patents were. He has a patent for cosmetic pomade or vanishing cream made from peanuts.
Oh, hey, oh,
Yeah. Another patent covered a process for producing paint and stain from clay. And the third patent involved a method for manufacturing paints and stains, which was building on his previous patent.
huh. So nothing to
Interesting.
do with,
Nothing to do with farming, except for the peanuts, I guess. But
well, never mind.
never mind that, yeah. But I mean, now you know. So
Now I know.
now we know. I had no idea.
Last year, a project that I had my cadets do was on the Columbian Exchange.
Hmm.
And brought into that was something that they talked about in the documentary about braiding seeds. So
Yeah.
enslaved women braided seeds into their hair,
Hmm.
mostly because their hair wasn't checked.
Which we talked about in the Haiti episodes.
Yep, right. And then using like the thought was, if they were able to start over, this is what they would need to start over. And it's kind of
Hmm.
these like essential crops.
Just so smart.
Yeah, brought
So
with
smart.
them.
And
Yeah,
that is
but a
so
lot of
cool how
like
like a lot of
the
those
rice and stuff
crops are
that we know
here.
today, it's actually from enslaved personnel, like bringing them over.
Yeah. Which is
Yeah,
just like, credit where it's due. That's
yeah.
just wild. But I think
The
that's one of the coolest things about this documentary was just like, to me anyway, was just how important the health of the soil is, which
mhm.
seems like a no-brainer, like duh, right?
Well, kind of, but honestly, like not really even thinking about it. Like, all right, I'll just stick it
Yeah,
in the dirt, but like I gotta nourish the dirt first, you know?
exactly. Like I never would have thought like just because it's not something that like just would come to me. Like I
Yeah,
guess if I was a farmer for a long time, I'd be like, yes, I need to make sure I have healthy soil. But like, how do I do that? Rather than just
yeah,
being like, I
yeah.
hope my soil's good. Because we talk about like Ukraine and their
Hmm.
black soil and how it's
Yep.
some of the best soil in the world. And I'm curious, most likely less work has to be done to keep it healthy just
Well,
because of the type of soil it is. But I'd
well,
be
I'm
curious to
curious
see
too, because when we talked to our guest the other day, we talked about like the
the color.
trading that needed to happen for fertilizers.
Fertilizer. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
Hmm.
he did talk a lot about that.
So still necessary.
From a lot of that they got from like Belarus and Russia too. So
Yeah, right.
So I mean, I'd be curious to talk to somebody like an expert on soil in Ukraine just to see
Yeah,
how that differs. Because obviously, like the soil there is great. We know that. But
right. But if they still are using fertilizers, like I don't know.
yeah, I wonder what the soil care looks like over there, rather than as opposed to like a Midwestern farm where
And
it's turning
and
into
I
the Dust
wonder
Bowl.
too if that might be the counterpoint. Like, look, we have pretty good soil, but still the things talked about for regenerative farming are just not practical because of XYZ.
Right.
Like I wonder if that would be the counterpoint.
Well, I
I don't
mean, I would say that. Like, I mean, like I could see that, but then again, we go back to like the Chihuahuan Desert, where it's like they're still managing to grow things. Maybe like.
know.
And
Hmm.
when we did see the desert scenes in Mexico, it was very cool. They were growing a lot. It wasn't
Hmm.
necessarily crops, right? Like it was just like grass and
Yeah,
like different types of flora that could grow in the desert,
yeah. But
which,
still important, right? Thinking
yeah,
about rain and runoff and the
no,
necessity of
absolutely.
these crops to keep the soil in place.
And
Yeah.
that was one of the things that they said as a result of, the cattle grazing and the regenerative farming down there,
Hmm.
or the regenerative practices in general, was
Yeah.
after like the year of this happening and going through the cycle and having things grow in the desert, now there was rain
Oh, yeah,
because,
right.
the plants were taking things from the soil, evaporating into the air.
Evaporates up in the
Then there
area.
were
Yeah.
storms, and that came
Yeah.
back down. So then it just created this cycle where it would repeat. And then the grass was stronger, cattle came back, had even
Yeah.
more food, left more cow pies. And it just, just like, okay, wow, it was that simple. They just had to literally have cows, a herd of cattle come through and graze and then move them
We
on and
just
just that's it.
It's crazy how much it just, and we say this a lot, just how interconnected everything is.
Hmm. And I think that's like the theme of our
Yeah,
podcast. Like whether we're trying to figure it out or not, everything always comes back to like just tying into each other. So
it's just all connected. Yeah.
yeah, which is pretty cool.
How
The
fragile that
cattle
is too,
actually
right?
came from Ellis Island.
No, no, they didn't. Pirates brought them over. Duh.
Yeah, obviously.
Cattle heard about guacamole in the New World and
Pirate
decided to
cattle.
steal a boat and become pirates to get over here.
Anyway, read our new book, Pirate Cattle of the Caribbean. I'd read it. The documentary talked about a few pretty cool, if you're interested, it talked about a pretty cool contemporary movements like Soul Fire Farm in upstate New York. They lived in the woman who runs it, Leah Penniman
Hmm.
was talking about how she lived in Albany and
Yeah.
obviously didn't have, I think she said, and there wasn't any great like farmers markets or anything like that in her
There
neighborhood.
wasn't a farmer's market, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it was hard to get. So she just started growing food like in
Hmm.
her little plot of land that she had in her like city yard or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And neighbors and stuff started coming over and being like, you should go, like, you should do this, like, as like a thing. Like, this should be something you really do because this is great. So she started Soul Fire Farm, and they do just that, but they use a lot of these like Black agrarian traditions, focusing on food sovereignty, anti-racist farming practices, and reconnecting Black communities with the land, which is really cool because I did a project on this, just on like the number of Black farmers, how drastically it's decreased when I was pursuing my master's.
Oh, really?
And it has, like, it is astonishing. Like back during Reconstruction, there was like something like a million
Hmm.
Black farmers in the United States, and that number's down to like 27,000 or something
Oh,
like that.
wow.
Like, don't take that with a
Yeah.
grain of salt, but it has drastically decreased
Hmm.
since then. So it's really cool to see organizations like Soul Fire Farm just getting back to those practices and reconnecting these communities with the land and the practices that their forefathers helped innovate and pioneer.
Not to take away from that statistic, but aren't farmers in general down a sizable percentage?
I'm sure they are, especially with the growth of like factory farms.
Yeah, just interesting in general. I was
Follow
gonna
our
go somewhere with
newsletter
that.
where
Oh,
we'll look that up and put more info in.
well, the other thing we can put in the newsletter is her book. Leah Penniman has a book, Farming While Black, and we have a
Hmm.
couple of other books that we could stick in there
Yeah, I
for
mean,
further reading.
I'd be happy to because I had I talked about like the Farms Frontlines book club, and we put out one book, so it'll be good to add to that.
Number two. Yeah.
Add to that list. Yeah. So book number two is Farming While Black, which should be an interesting read. And I
Yeah.
mean, and the one that I thought was really cool was Braiding Sweetgrass, which
Yeah.
I guess the name comes from like what we were talking about, where they would braid
Mhm.
seeds into their hair and stuff like that. So that's really cool. And yeah, so we'll put in our newsletter the documentaries, a list of books, and we'll try to actually follow up on the statistics that we said we threw out
Okay.
there and weren't sure on. So follow us. It's farmsandfrontlines.substack.com, and you can sign up to get our like weekly newsletter where we put out interesting stuff like that. Well, we think it's interesting.
We think it's interesting.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this, I hope you do too.
All right.
So yeah, that was that's regenerative farming. It is a really cool. I definitely recommend going and watching the documentary, if nothing else,
Common ground. Yeah.
just because there's a lot of really cool stuff in there. We didn't get too much into
The
like
Farm Bill.
the farm bill or the government reaction to this because a couple reasons. One, I think the farm bill is such a big deal that we should do just a full either episode or multiple episodes on
Hmm.
what is the farm bill, how did it come about, what is in it,
How
what
it's
does it mean.
transformed. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's a huge deal. The farm lobby is one of the biggest lobbies in the world, to my knowledge. So
I don't know.
like it's a really big deal, and I think it would be worthwhile to dig into it. Just not to tear anything apart, or yeah, we don't want to take any sides or anything. We just want to let you know what's happening, what
Hmm.
it is, and how it's evolved and what it means for farmers, and also how like regenerative farming is playing into that because a lot of these farmers have reached out or actually testified before Congress about the benefits
Hmm.
of regenerative farming.
But then they don't qualify for subsidies.
Right. If they
Um,
do uh,
right.
go that route.
And then the other thing I think we should talk about in another episode is like the interconnectedness of government and industry. This is
Mhm.
specifically like pesticide chemical industry.
Yeah, and I think that's like watching the documentary. That was one of the things that came to mind was like farming is kind of it made me think of like the Industrial Revolution, where like farming is like right now in the thick of the like farming industrial revolution. These like regenerative farmers are trying to come up with a new way to like get out of that and learn from it and move on to better
Hmm.
things. Like after the Industrial Revolution came about, there was a lot of laws passed, a lot of protests and reactions, and people being like, "Hey, these practices, like, sure, they're great, and we're seeing a lot of profit, but like, they're not sustainable. They're not
Yeah.
good. We need to work on this." And I
Hmm.
feel that's kind of like where farming is at right now,
Yeah.
just from my outside perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to look at.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Like just how you would think that some, again, we're looking at it from one point of view. Something that is cheaper, it saves the farmer money
Mhm.
and it has less environmental impacts would be like championed.
Exactly. And I mean, like I said to you before we started recording, the farmer who was talking about switching to regenerative farming, who had been
Yeah.
doing it the typical way, he's like, I haven't bought crop insurance in years. And when
Hmm.
farmers buy the subsidized crop insurance, They buy the insurance from an insurance company, and then the subsidy is that the government will help them recover that money. Like they'll help the
Right.
insurance companies pay that money to the farmer. So anyone who's like calls themselves a fiscal conservative would be glad that these people aren't having to buy crop insurance because
Yeah.
they don't want the government to have to fork over money when you lost your farm because there was no reason to.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the farm lobby article or
So the farm lobby, a lot of what they say, it actually surprised me because I looked it up just to try and see what their reaction was to this documentary, like
Mhm.
we're trying to find. And a lot of it was like, yeah, we agree. Like climate smart is the same as regenerative. Like even the National Cattlemen's Beef Association was like, beef can be regenerative as well. Like
Yeah.
there are ways around it. Like they were trying to emphasize the efficiency of the current beef system,
Hmm.
but like they point out that grass finished cattle require far more land and time. So like an all
Hmm.
grass regenerative system would massively increase land demand, which
Yeah.
yes, it would. That's very true.
Yeah.
So it's like they have these voluntary improvements where they're supporting rancher-led sustainability efforts rather than forced regulations,
Hmm.
which I get, like
Yeah.
makes sense. And I get it'd probably be a lot more time. The NCBA, the Cattlemen's Beef Association, they have a climate neutral by 2040 goal, and
Oh,
they're
wow.
participating in like climate smart grants, which is like Trust in Beef, it's called, to help ranchers adopt new practices. And, obviously they oppose any mandates to like limit the herd size or tax methane or ban feedlot techniques and stuff like that. So there are some rays of sunshine from the lobby, which surprised me. I thought
Yeah.
they would be very much just like, no, we're going to keep doing the things the way we're doing things. But I think at this point, just the facts are like you have to start changing,
Hmm.
whether it's incrementally or all at once, which would never happen. But
Yeah.
it was kind of good to see just that they're realizing that there is truth to what the regenerative farmers are saying and that it is something that they can look into. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. Like
Yeah.
I'm always a little skeptical whenever I see these like climate neutral by 2040. It's like, okay,
Yeah. I know.
show me the work there. What are you
What does
doing to
that
make
even
that
mean? Like,
actually happen? Yeah.
you know, the one quote from the AFBF president, like, we have been doing this. We just named it something different. Like, regenerative is just now the current buzzword
The word, right.
versus, like you said, climate smart, sustainable,
Hmm.
age old stewardship.
And of course, they're like, they're like, there are some that they're saying, yeah, they say regenerative is just the buzzword.
Hmm.
The American Farm Bureau Federation like pushes back on the narratives that fault big ag for environmental harm. And it's like, no, like you also need to just take responsibility
Hmm.
for the harm that you've done. Like you
Hmm.
just own it and say, yeah, you know what, that was the thinking at the time. We
Yeah.
were
But
wrong.
we can do better. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that would go a lot further than just being like, big ag is not to blame. You're a bunch of,
Or focusing on
you know,
words. Like, let's see
yeah,
it can be done better. Why don't we do it better? I don't know.
exactly. Like, well, okay, great. So what do we do? Farm Bureau was one that was the most stuck in their way, like very adamant about just keep doing things the way that they were doing it. Okay. So, they stress that regenerative methods, they have to be economically viable. But if you like watch this documentary, and this is just me looking at the documentary, I haven't done a ton of research outside of that, right?
Hmm.
But it's
Yep.
like they are profitable. Like their crops are healthy. They can keep growing when the farm that did things the traditional way is now washed away in dust.
Yeah.
Like, but the soil is not healthy. The regenerative farms are and can keep growing.
Right.
And in
Right.
like in warmer climates, they can keep growing year round. It's not like they just have to wait for one specific crop, right?
Yeah.
So, it's just like they also warn that eliminating fertilizers or pesticides could hurt yields and food security, but we did not see that in regenerative farming. We saw, cover crops and
Right.
other methods to actually make the soil even healthier than using pesticides.
And
And
it makes me so skeptical of like, no, we need to think about keeping pesticides when like, well, where are we getting any of this? Anything that's coming out, right? Hey, we need pesticides to help us with XYZ. Like everything is so intertwined with, right, like you were talking about earlier, the cancer and the illnesses that come out of that with the company that is making the cure for that illness or
mhm,
cancer. Like
yeah,
they are now so intertwined that I just am skeptical of anything coming out where like,
exactly.
hey, pesticides still might need to be used.
And
Who's telling me that? You know what I mean? Who's
like
saying that?
Native American, these black farmers, they were making very healthy food long before these chemical pesticides were a thing.
I don't remember what the one chemical was that they were talking about. Like you can find them in like literally anything. Like it's in the rain, it's in our kids' brains. Like
Yeah,
I don't know.
right.
I don't know. Just poison like everything.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, like, because these are billion, trillion dollar companies, like, of course, there are lobbyists fighting to be like, no, no, no,
Right.
we need that.
Yeah,
They have the
right.
money to do
Exactly.
that, you know?
Just real skeptical of anything coming out with that.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so
All right.
that's regenerative farming. I think it was super interesting. Go watch the documentary, sign up for our newsletter. But we're gonna try and start our Banana Wars series relatively soon,
I've got
because
the intro written.
it is super super fascinating, and I love it because it's just history, which is always fun. So
Yep. All
tune in, sign up for our newsletter, and we'll let you know when it's coming out.
right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.